Hello. Okay, I'm going to try this new recording program, and I guess I don't need my picture in the corner, but whatever. I'll let you look at me all night long. Anyways, for the next 15 minutes here, I'm going to record about the Dark Ages, and please watch it. Let me know you have seen the session by typing your last name and then your first name on the comments below. Okay. Now, as we talked about, that the Dark Ages can have multiple names. You can call it the Dark Ages, or you can call it the Middle Ages. Okay. It is also known as the medieval period. Okay, those are all the different names that you can use for the Dark Age time itself. Okay, the name Dark Age is pretty descriptive. It makes a little bit more sense in terms of, what it's all about. The Middle Ages, the reason why they used to call it the Middle Ages is because before they broke up the time period into, six, 7, 8 time periods, it used to be like ancient world, Middle Ages, ancient times, Middle Ages, and then modern. Okay, that was only the three times. So that's where the Middle Ages came about. Okay, then in more modern times, historians started to break it up into more time periods. Okay, it's kind of like what your textbook was saying in chapter 1 there. So for, your textbook does it in eras. I do it in what I call worlds. Okay, and then so I call it the medieval period or the medieval world. Okay, so world. Okay, this is another name. Okay, all right. So let's get started. Again, the medieval period or Middle Ages. Okay. AKA means also known as. Okay, we're talking about Western Europe. Okay, remember Eastern Europe. After the split in that last video, after the split, it is now the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so this is more Western Europe. Okay, when was it? AD 500. Okay, to anywhere from 1000 to maybe 1500. Okay, I think sorry, let me redo that. I think in my timeline I did 1100 here. Okay, so any one of those, there's no real set date. This one is pretty set because the fall of the Roman Empire is 476, right? And that is with the death of Romulus Augustulus. Okay. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, you guys know that. The Germanic tribes came in. The Visigoths and the Ostrogoths were the two German tribes that we haven't really studied. Visigoths and Ostrogoths. Okay, those were the two German tribes that came in. And the reason, it wasn't that it was an invasion per se. The interesting thing is the German tribes, the Visigoth and the Ostrogoth, always wanted to be part of the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire didn't want them. They're kind of like the Gauls. Remember the Gauls with Julius Caesar? Okay, they were barbarians. The Roman Empire didn't want them. Okay, they've tried several times to join the empire, and the empire always said no. So by time 476 came around, they came in to try to join the empire, but the empire was so weak at that time that it eventually just fell on its own. So it wasn't this mass invasion and the empire fell. The empire was already starting to have issues. Okay, and both domestic as well as foreign issues. And so it wasn't hard for it to fall. Now, the reason why we go into the medieval period is because the Germans, the German barbarians, they were not very educated, okay, like the people of the Roman Empire. So no, they didn't know how to continue education. They didn't know how to run the government, that sort of thing. And so a lot of things just started to fall apart. Okay. All right. So this is the map I showed you the other day. Okay. Most of the Gauls, or the Visigoth and Ostrogoths, came from Germany up here. Okay. They came down, and eventually the Ostrogoths took over Italy. The Visigoths actually ended up more on the Byzantine Empire over here. Okay, so the Ostrogoths was led by Odoacer, and the Visigoths was led by Theodoric, and that sort of thing. And then Theodoric came in and took out Odoacer. Okay, but so after the 476 and the fall of the empire, the Ostrogoths ends up, basically occupying Italy. Okay, so and that allowed another group of barbarians known as the Franks to come about. Okay, so that's what we're going to study, is a little bit about the Franks. Okay, now, what was the characteristics of the Middle Ages? Well, for the most part, the word survival comes about. I mean, it was, there was no government, no formal government. There were no police. There was no one to tell you right and wrong, per se. And so people, were pretty much on their own. They were out in the countryside, growing food for themselves, and trying to survive on their own. Okay, that's very descriptive of this time period. There are no big cities. Remember, in your textbook, all the big cities were over in on the Byzantine side, on the eastern side. Okay, and then so at this point there's no big cities. Okay, poor and disorganized because there were no leadership. So everyone was poor. There was no order to things, and there was no learning. Okay, all the education had pretty much stopped. And so a good example of this is the Greeks knew, an example of the decline in education is this: the Greeks knew that the earth was round. Okay, in fact, remember we studied that one of the Greek philosophers was able to figure out the circumference of the earth, and they came within 196 miles of the circumference of the earth. So they knew the earth was round, and they knew we were a heliocentric solar system, meaning the earth revolved around the sun. Helio, meaning sun. Okay, but by the middle of the medieval period, the people thought the earth was flat, and if you sailed out far enough, you would fall off the face of the earth. Okay, so that's why that shows you how we lost education. The other thing was the Romans knew the secret of using concrete to build their buildings. Okay, the Colosseum was built out of concrete. Okay, but if you look at the castles that were built during the Dark Ages, a lot of them were built with stone blocks. Okay, and that's like the ancient times where they had stone blocks and they would build the pyramids. Okay, and then now they went to concrete where they can make it and form it out of anything they want. And then they lost all that technology in the Middle Ages, and they were going back to stone blocks again. Okay, so that is, the difference. Okay, now what caused some of the Dark Ages? Poor education. Okay, which we just talked about. Okay, and when an effect of it, not so much of a cause, but an effect of poor education, was people didn't know how to read things like the Bible. Okay, now this is an important note, not simply because we're a Christian school, but because the Roman Catholic Church began to teach things that were not in the Bible. Okay, and so their doctrine changed, what they believed in changed. Okay, and so now the Roman Catholic sort of teaches a lot about a lot of things that we don't believe in, that was developed during this time period. Okay, and that eventually then will bring about what's known as the Reformation later on. Okay, so it's an important point as the Catholic Church becomes more and more powerful during this time period. Okay, literacy, meaning being able to read, went down. A lot of people did not know how to read. Okay, barbarians came in from Germany, and they just didn't. They were just barbarians. They acted like barbarians. They would knock down, buildings and that kind of thing. Right. The only people that really knew how to read, the barbarians didn't know how to read. They were illiterate. They weren't literate. Okay. The only people that knew how to read were the church and the priests. Okay. They knew how to read, but they did not teach anyone outside the church. Okay. All right. Poverty. There was no money. Everyone was very poor, and they had no money. Okay. So how did they trade? They went back to what's known as barter. Okay. So in the Roman Empire, they actually had currency. They actually had money. Okay. Coins that had the emperor's face on it. By the time the Dark Ages came, they didn't have those coins anymore. So it went to bartering, sort of, I give you my pig for your horse sort of thing. Okay. There were constant invaders. So once the barbarians came in, they didn't end things. The Vikings from Scandinavia came in. Okay. So if you go back to this picture, okay, so the Vikings were up here. This is the Vikings. Oops. Here we go. This is the Vikings up here. Okay, and they would often sail down here and attack Europe. Okay, and so there were constantly a lot of invasions during this time, and a lot of struggles with these invaders. And that's part of the reason why they started building castles, okay, to protect themselves from invaders and from their neighbors. Okay, so the invaders, they constantly had border disputes. They were constantly fighting neighbor to neighbor. They would disrupt trade. Okay, so when you did establish trade, they would come in and they would pillage and steal and kill people, and really break up the trade routes and the trade from town to town. Okay. So there's a lot of things about the Dark Ages that you might learn in a 7th grade class. You learn about castles, you learn about knights in shining armor, actually not so shining of an armor. You learn about moats and things that go around the castles, that sort of stuff. You learn that kind of thing in 7th grade. In this class, we're going to focus predominantly on what's known as the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire ended up being the real political power behind the Western Europe there. Okay, so this next section the next video will really start with the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so that will be part 2.